Hey, boys and girls. Today we're going to focus on another tool that readers of nonfiction utilize to understand their text, asking questions. Let's see if we can practice using the nonfiction reading strategies as we examine just a second a different way to look at time. So we just did our preview, skim, and scan, and now we're going to think about some questions that we might have about time. So even though we already know some things about time, like how long a second is, a minute, or an hour, today we're going to learn how much can actually happen in a second. When we read nonfiction, it's so important for us to take our time and read thoughtfully and carefully so that we can connect to what we already know and gather new information. As we read today's text, we may become curious about the topic, time. When we're curious, we ask ourselves questions about what we're reading and what else we want to know. All right, I'm going to reread this real quick. A second goes by pretty quickly. In fact, several have passed since you started reading this sentence, and they just keep going by. There are 60 seconds in every minute, 3,600 in every hour, and on and on. Most people reading this book will experience more than 2.5 billion seconds in their lifetime. But a lot can happen in a second. Some surprising, even amazing things can take place in a very short time. Other events unfold more slowly. And that's what this book is about. All right, so we're going to be reading about things that can happen in different measures of time. So I wonder what kinds of things we're going to read about in that can happen in a second. Doesn't seem like very much could happen in a second because that's so short. Let's see, in 1 second. So let's read this section. The second doesn't relate to any cycle in nature. It's a human invention and the shortest interval of time most of us use in our daily lives. The Babylonians came up with the idea of a second about 4,000 years ago, but they had no way to measure such a short interval of time. So in 1 second, a vulture in flight flaps its wings once. A pygmy shrew's heart beats 14 times. A bat can make 200 high-pitched calls. A rattlesnake shakes its tail in warning 60 times. A hummingbird beats its wings 50 times. A bumblebee beats its wings 200 times. So, wow. Once in a second, 50 times in a second, 200 times in a second. A midge, which is a kind of gnat. I love how she put that example in there for our context clues because I wouldn't know what a midge was except for that it was a bug. Beats its wings 1,000 times. A woodpecker hammers a tree with its trunk 20 times. A black mamba slithers a frightening 24 feet, 7 meters. Think about that meter stick that you use in math. 7 of those in a second. That's fast. Like I thought a cheetah was fast. A cheetah sprinting flat out. A sailfish swimming at top speed. Both travel 100 feet or 30 meters. So 30 of those meter sticks. While a human, a very fast human, definitely not Mrs. Freck, can run 39 feet or 12 meters in a second. I forget what that guy's name is, but the fastest man alive. Oh, I'll have to look that up. So that's a question I have. Who is the fastest man alive? That's a good question. A stone dropped from rest falls 16 feet or 5 meters. A peregrine falcon in a dive or stoop. I love how they put those synonyms in there. plunges more than 300 feet or 91 meters. The Helios 2 satellite zooms 43.5 miles or 70 kilometers. So I know from math, that's meters times kilo. Is that 1,000? Tell me if I'm wrong. This is the fastest man-made object has ever traveled. A commercial jet at cruising altitude covers about 800 feet or 244 meters. And a jet-powered thrust SSC covered 1,119 feet or 341 meters while setting the land speed record. So on this page, we see a meteor entering the Earth's atmosphere can travel 44 miles or 71 kilometers. A howler monkey's deafening scream travels 1,125 feet or 343 meters. A human can blink 7 times in a second. Light travels 186,000 miles or 300,000 kilometers. Somewhere in the world, 4 babies are born and 2 people die every second. 1,500 chickens are killed. The Apollo 10 spacecraft traveled almost 7 miles during re-entry, the fastest humans have ever traveled in a man-made vehicle. The male mannequin rubs its wingtips together more than 100 times, creating a sound like a note played on a violin. And Earth advances 18.5 miles in its orbit around the sun. So each second we go about 18.5 miles. That's pretty cool. All right, so now my heading is changing to 1 minute. So when I read the 1 second part, I'm like, wow, that's not a long period of time. And I had no idea that so many different things could happen in 1 second. All right, so in this section, if that's the kind of stuff that can happen in a second, the stuff that can happen in a minute, which is like 60 seconds, which still does not feel like a long measure of time, I can only imagine the things that are going to happen in that 1 minute. I know when we used to, in first grade, when we used to celebrate the 100th day of school, we used to try to do things for 100 seconds, which would be like 1 minute and a few extra, and about a minute and a half, a little more than a minute and a half. All right, I'm going to read this section. The minute, like the second, isn't based on any natural cycle. The 60 minutes in an hour, like the 60 seconds in a minute, are based on the Babylonian counting system that was in use thousands of years ago. Let's read a few things that we think will happen. A person walking at a brisk pace covers about 300 feet. A giant tortoise lumbers about 15 feet. The common snail glides about 1 foot on its slimy track. A 3-toed sloth hauls itself about 10 feet. We used to try to walk in 100 seconds. We used to try to cover that amount of space. I remember doing that whenever we were doing time in first grade. The moon travels 38 miles in its orbit around the Earth. A charging grizzly bear gallops 1/2 mile in a minute. A half mile in a minute. I don't even think I could do that running. A skydiver free fall plunges 2 miles in a minute. And a person standing in one spot at the equator travels 18 miles as the Earth rotates. That's very specific. In 1 minute, an elephant's heart beats about 30 times. A very chilly crocodile's heart may slow to just 1 beat. A hamster's heart beats about 450 times. This is when I read this one and this one, I was like, oh, these are all about hearts. I wonder about a human. Yay, here's my answer. An adult heart beats about 70 times, and a child's heart beats about 100 times. And on my Fitbit, it tracks my heartbeat. Like it keeps a record to try to measure how healthy I am by how many heartbeats I have when I'm active and when I'm at rest. It rained 1.5 inches in Guadalupe Island in the Caribbean, a record. This reminds me of we were reading our 2021 Guinness Book of World Records, and they had a whole page about rainfall and in different places and what the records were. People around the world drink the equivalent of 2,600,000 12-ounce soft drinks. The world's population increases by 149 people, 200, which means 65 people are born and 116 people die. You subtract those two numbers and you must get 149. 2,200,000 pounds of rice are harvested. Around the world, 59,000 barrels of oil are used, and almost 15,000 of them are in the United States. A hungry horned lizard can eat 45 ants at one time. I wonder if those lizards have contests. I bet I can eat 50 ants at one time. Maybe they try to do records too. So those are a lot of things that might happen in a minute. We're going to read the next section in an hour. The hour was also created by humans. The hour we use today comes from the Egyptians. About 4,000 years ago, they began dividing daytime and nighttime into 12 parts. I like how they have this population one in each section. So when we talked about the second, it was like 4 people are born and 2 people die. Now we have 15,913 people are born and 6,933 people die. So the world's population increases because more people are born than die by 8,980. An average of 19 gallons of fresh water is used for every person on Earth. The sun travels 500,000 miles on its trip around the center of the Milky Way galaxy. So even our sun is going in a circle around the center of the galaxy. A baby blue whale feeding on its mother's milk gains almost 10 pounds an hour. Glad it doesn't take me an hour to gain 10 pounds. Some days I feel like that. In one day. The day is based on the rising and the setting of the sun, the time it takes the Earth to make one rotation on its axis. The day is the original unit of timekeeping in every human culture. So chickens are laying 2 billion eggs. Anteaters are lapping up 30,000 termites in a day. The mayfly larva hatches and lives its entire life and dies in one day. Kelp, a kind of seaweed, can grow 18 inches. The world's population increases by 215 people every day. 382,000 are born and 167,000 die. A female flea, she can lay 100 eggs a day. The population of India increases by 47,000 people. So, wow, in that 215,000 people, 47,000 people were from India. The human heart in one day is going to beat 100,000 times. Bamboo can grow 36 inches. People use the equivalent of 2 billion sheets of letter-sized paper. That's one reason I like Google Classroom, is because I don't have to print so much. Or all these little online things, like instead of printing out 5 sheets for vocabulary, you can just use the electricity instead. 50 new species of plants and animals are identified, but another 150 species go extinct, mostly because of human activity. In 1 week, over the ages, people found it useful to have a unit of time longer than a day, but shorter than a month. So we have what we call a week. Weeks varied in length from 3 to 20 days. Interesting. I never thought about that. The week was not 7 days. Our 7-day week originated in Babylonia around 2,500 years ago. All right, so this migrating bar-tailed godwit flies 5,500 miles. Ladybugs in a week will eat 500 aphids. That's why they're good for your garden. The International Space Station orbits Earth 110 times. Human development destroys an area of forest equal in size to 550,000 football fields. A monarch butterfly on its annual migration flies 700 miles. There are as many as 8,000 earthquakes strong enough to be felt. Fewer than 3 on average are powerful enough to do serious damage. 2 mice, a male and a female, might mate, and we're going to check in with them again soon. Moose antlers, the fastest growing tissue of any mammal, can add 6 inches to their length. And a giant pumpkin can gain 150 pounds in a week. That's a fast growing pumpkin. He is soaking up those nutrients. Oh, here's our mice. In a month, our 2 mice had an average litter of 10 babies, and so now there are 12 mice. Start doing that multiplication. That's a lot of mice. It's a big problem. 84,000 new books are published. That makes me happy. More than 700 new species of insects will be named. I got excited about the facts and I forgot to read the history. After the day, the month may be the oldest human unit of timekeeping. A month on our calendar is roughly based on the time it takes the full moon to go through its full cycle of phases, about 29 and a half days. The human world population increases by about 6,556,000 people. 1,616,000 people are born, and 5,060,000 people die. People around the world produce enough trash to fill a square pit more than 1 mile on each side and 1,200 feet deep. So almost a mile deep. Or no, not quite. If a mile is 1,600 meters, then that's definitely a lot shorter. In 1 year. The year is based on the time it takes the Earth to make one full circuit of the sun. Along with the day, the month, the year is one of the 3 basic units of time shared by people throughout history. An estimated 50 people, not 50 million, that would be bad. 50 people are killed by sharks. But the mosquito kills 2 million people in a year with mosquito-borne diseases. Wow, so you thought sharks were dangerous. We better be worried about those mosquitoes. Mount Everest rises an inch every year. We're going to read about Mount Everest in another book, so that mountain keeps getting taller. The moon moves 1.5 inches farther away from Earth, so the moon's going farther from us. The Arctic tern flies 40,000 miles. It has the longest migration in the animal world. Oh, here's our mice again. If all of the offspring of our original pair of mice survived and mated, the 2 rodents would now have more than 1 million living descendants. Whew. In 1 year, you can have 1 million mice. My goodness, I do not want that. A termite queen will lay 3 million eggs. That's why that's important in our area to get that termite protection. Global warming causes the sea level to rise about 1/8 of an inch, and the seafloor spreading moves the United States 1 inch further away from Europe. So every year we're a little bit farther away from Europe, which I guess means we're a little bit closer to Asia and Australia. All right, very quick. In our universe, some things, such as light traveling across the room, happen much too quickly for us to notice. Well, science has given us the ability to measure many of these very fast events, even if we can't experience them directly. This one says the human brain can register a finger touching something in 1/100th of a second. So that's how fast something touching me goes to my brain, less than a second. A fastball makes the trip from Major League Baseball pitcher's hand to the home plate in less than 4/10ths of a second. So if you divided a second into 10 equal parts, it would go in 4 of those parts. It would already be where it's supposed to be. Very long. Observing the most distant galaxies is like peering into the distant past. We're seeing them as they were. And that is hundreds, thousands, millions, so that's got to be billions. 13 billion years ago. On a human time scale, some events occur very rarely. Others seem to happen at an incredibly slow pace. Counting one number every second would take 31,000 years to count to 1 trillion. A French woman lived to be 122 years old. She holds the record for the longest human lifespan. A human keog, a clam, lived to be 405 years old. And there's a koi, a kind of goldfish, that lived to be 226 years old. And the oldest living single organism that we know of is a bristlecone pine tree in California. It's more than 4,862 years. By the year 2100, it's predicted that the sea levels of the world will have risen 19 inches. That makes me nervous knowing that we live that close to the ocean. The sun will get larger and hotter. In 1 billion years, the earth will be too hot to support life. And 2 billion years from now, Earth's oceans will have boiled away. That's a long time from now. All right. So we're gonna stop there, and I'm gonna close up this lesson on the next slide and tell you what I want you to do for the next part.